Well, good afternoon and good morning. Once again, glad you could make it to Beyond Compliance for December 2020, where we're covering some regulatory items coming soon, complements of the FDA's new traceability rule. And we've got 7 key points everyone should be aware of right now. I'm glad you could be on the line with us. My name is Aaron Bolshaw. I'm the VP of Marketing for SafetyChain and the moderator for Beyond Compliance. And for those of you that don't know or maybe new to it, Beyond Compliance is an ongoing monthly industry update for food, beverage, CPG, and process manufacturers, specifically the fine folks in the line, facility operators, QA, safety, compliance professionals, even the lab. We partner with leaders across different sectors, from like labs, equipment manufacturers, consultants, regulators, lots more, really just with one goal, which is to bring insights around the market that shape the way we grow our businesses, deliver quality products to our customers, and also safeguard our brands. We do try and give you some things every time that you can take back to the plant with you to improve production, compliance, and quality with those. So that's our goal today as well. SafetyChain sponsors the webinar series, and SafetyChain is the #1 plant management platform that improves yield, maximizes productivity, and ensures compliance, specifically for USDA, FDA, all these good regulations, right? For food, beverage, and CPG companies. We're the only complete solution for production. Think about OEE, SPC, food quality, and safety, the QMS side of the house, and even supplier compliance and beyond. So, all right, with that, we are scheduled for about an hour. As we often do with these webinars, we'll save some time at the end for some questions. We can't hear you if you talk. We're not going to hear you, but you will hear us, and we do want to hear from you. So use the webinar console to submit any questions throughout the presentation. We'll save some time, like I said, at the end to cover that, and I believe we'll have a lot of good questions as we have time to get to them. So if anyone has any audio issues, just try to pick up a phone, call in. Usually that resolves it. And then everyone on the line, anyone that registered for this will actually get a recording. We'll get the presentation deck, so you'll be able to take this back into your facilities and share as you wish. So with that, I would like to introduce our panelists. So we got a powerhouse today. So Shamanique Schrick is a solutions architect here at SafetyChain, and she's brilliant. She's got over 10 years of experience as a food safety expert, an auditor, and a quality specialist. A couple of degrees more than I have, biochemistry, molecular biology. So the very science that connects the food into our systems is she's an expert at, and she's worked at Treehouse, Cargill, TSM Bakery, and was also a microbiologist at Miller Coors. Shamanique, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
All right. And then Eric Edmonds, lots of really interesting, and I say this a lot, Eric, the Venn diagram that you of your experience is really unique. Got a combination of legal, regulatory, and food industry expert. You bring that to the Atchison Group, and you also join us on FSMA Fridays. Certified in HACCP, registered environmental health specialist. We've got a preventative controls qualified individual here with us today for FSMA, and also a produce safety rule trainer. So the list keeps going on and on. Eric, thanks for joining us once again.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Yeah, I think so. Both of you guys are going to make the nice list this year with all the generous dedication of time you're giving to Beyond Compliance. And then Eric, I know we've been talking about this stuff on FSMA Friday as well. So just can't thank you enough both for joining. And we do have a lot of ground to cover today. But I just wanted to start out very quickly for all the viewers, just a couple of things we want to give you today and want you to be able to take back to the plants. One is, just an understanding of the new FDA traceability guideline, right? What are the KDEs, who's on the FTLs, all that good stuff. But two, we wanted to take an approach here that was a visual approach. We wanted to give everyone a view of what it could look like in a digital perspective because some of the requirements, right? So you'll see the SafetyChain platform in front of you, but our goal here is not to sell you software or consulting services. We just wanted to be visual in the way we represented and visual in the way we showed some of the records the FDA will be asking for, and Shamanique will be sharing that a little bit later. So with that, Eric, why don't you take us off? Here's the top 7. Here's what we're going to go through. If you kick us off, and I'm going to be controlling the screens here for us, and just let me know when you want me to fast forward. Okay.
Sounds great. So, yeah, a lot of ground to cover, like you said, Aaron. So today we're going to focus on the real key factors, the new terms from the Food Traceability Rule as it's proposed. So we'll cover really what FDA is calling the Food Traceability List, which is that list of high-risk foods that are going to require some additional traceability records at different spots along the supply chain. And that's where we're going to get into the new terms the FDA's put out there for this rule, the CTEs and KDEs, which are critical tracking events and key data elements along the supply chain that the rule is calling out as new requirements, and which of those apply to different people along the supply chain. So the real critical tracking events that FDA has lined out is the points along the supply chain where these items are grown, received, shipped, transformed, or created, whether through repacking or kind of processing, as well as some kind of more, I guess, less requirements or lack of requirements when kill steps are applied along the supply chain through a validated kill step during processing, as well as the record maintenance requirements. And as Aaron said, Chamonix is going to touch on really what it could look like in an electronic program for managing all these records and keeping that all there so you can supply the information to FDA as needed upon request. And we'll touch a little bit on kind of the comment period and the overall timelines and deadlines for when FDA plans to be enforcing and really when the rubber hits the road with the rule in a few years after, or a couple of years after the final rule is proposed. So we'll touch on all of these seven items today. So we can jump to the actual list and kind of just provide an overview. So FDA has been working on this for quite a few years. It's part of FSMA, really. So 2010, when President Barack Obama signed FSMA, this was one of those aspects the FDA has been working on ever since, and this is just finally getting out to kind of the real actual proposed rule. They've been real busy with all the other kind of 7-pillar rules of FSMA, but this has been an ongoing process since right around the time FSMA was passed. So as you look at the list, you'll see it's a lot of the usual suspects that you've seen in the news for recalls or foodborne illness outbreaks in the past 10 to 20 years, especially. So it's kind of what you would expect to see FDA identifying as what would be termed as a higher risk food that has some additional traceability requirements. So they really created the list by looking into the history of all the foods, of each particular food. So they looked into, has it been involved in a recall or a foodborne illness outbreak? And they also looked into kind of the points along the supply chain where contamination was likely to occur, as well as where it may be controlled through something like a kill step. And just really looked into really focusing on microbiological and chemical hazards within this list. So most of them are kind of whole items, but some of them are further processed items like the ready-to-eat deli salads that you see there at the bottom of the list. But this is the proposed list, so there is a chance that through the comment period it'll change slightly. I don't imagine it'll change drastically, but there'll definitely be some comments from industry and the public that may push FDA to a slight revision. And of course, FDA leaves the opportunity down the road that they may be adding new items to the list if new products or items are associated with foodborne illness outbreaks or that sort of thing. So the key terms that we're looking at here, critical tracking events is really the steps along the supply chain that FDA feels are key to having information available. So when an item is grown, shipped, processed, received, or created, and those are the points along the supply chain where records are going to be FDA with both their trace forward and trace back investigations, especially when there's a recall or a foodborne illness. And the key data elements is the information at each of these critical tracking events that is going to help FDA facilitate an actual trace back or trace forward exercise. So they really use this based on a pilot program that was conducted by IFT since FSMA was passed, that identified some weaknesses in the kind of traceability of the supply chain of the United States. And what they really kind of keyed in on is the things that were hampering investigations were, first, not all aspects of the supply chain were really covered by what FDA typically has as their traceability requirements, is the one up, one down type of requirement. So they said farms and restaurants or retail locations are largely kind of exempt from that, which makes it really difficult to even start the investigation, typically because the retail location or restaurant is going to be the one that the person who becomes ill directly counts as saying, this is what I ate and this is where I ate it, this is how I got sick. But the FDA would go and not have all that information available in all senses. They do recognize that a lot of companies out there have put in great traceability systems, but even when they have, when you go along the supply chain from company to company, the data wasn't necessarily lining up. So these key data elements are going to kind of really say, this is the information we have, and so it'll be present at each step along the supply chain. So FDA will be able to go from company to company to kind of track this information to really where it may be sourced, or where the contamination may have happened. And part of the rule and what the statute, section 204 of FSMA really did is kind of said, FDA can't necessarily require companies to really create a brand new program or contain the information along the entire supply chain, but they should have this information already in some of their records. So reference records is really a long list of potential records that a company may have that has this information. So anything from a processing record when something's being transformed or created, to just a bill of lading or a shipment record. And that's something that you'll have the information there. And really when kind of an electronic system is going to become really useful is organizing that information and providing to FDA when they request certain things. The traceability lot code and traceability product description really are what most of us are familiar with. Traceability lot code using kind of an alphanumeric number or descriptor to identify a specific production code or packing lot to kind of create bookends of different production dates. And the traceability product description is literally that, a description of the product. So we have listed there that there's a difference between single ingredient and multiple ingredient products. And the real difference there is, so the general things are going to be the same for both, that this is the amount of the product, this is how it's packed, whether it's a clamshell or a case or a pallet, things like that. But the single ingredient actually will call out the specific single ingredient or commodity that's there, while multiple ingredient products will kind of include the overall product description, whether it's a deli salad in a clamshell or tote type of thing. So that's the real difference there, is single ingredients can actually call out a single product by name, whereas multiple ingredient products will be more of a description of what the product is. I can jump to the next slide. Thank you. And generally, like I said, FDA expects most companies to have this type of information already there. It's just not going to be necessarily organized in a single location. So what the general program overview is going to need to do is list and describe the reference records, or where the information is located and how those reference records are linked. So a bill of lading or receipt for receiving an ingredient that may be used and processed into another ingredient that's tied to those batch records, and finally kind of those finished product lot codes. as well as a description of where to find that information on the records. Companies will have to refer back to that food traceability list and kind of keep a tracker on all the items that are on the list that they use or produce as part of that, and kind of include how they're assigning traceability lot codes and how they're describing the product there. And then just to kind of deal with that issue that I mentioned about how companies use different terms and different coding systems, there needs to be an explanation within the program that FDA will be able to understand your data. So how you assign a lot code, any abbreviations or special terminology that you use within your program that's not the same as everyone across the country, there'll have to be a general description of that so FDA can look at that overall description and really understand the data that they're receiving from you. So we're going to start with the bare bones of when the food products are originally grown. So records for growers are pretty simple and straightforward, and that's that they need to have an actual growing area coordinate listed as part of their production record. So FDA refers to this really as the GPS coordinate. That's kind of the location at which you would enter the growing field. There are some different requirements for sprouts and fish that are on the list. So sprouts have some specific things about tracking kind of the person who cleaned the seeds or treated the seeds along the supply chain. And farmers may end up getting some of those additional records as well if they hire different people to harvest or cool or pack the product. But the real key for the farmers are those growing area coordinates. And just like it is a GPS coordinate for a farm or the location where things are grown, fishing vessels will be kind of recording the dates that they were at sea, and kind of the National Marine Fisheries Program kind of GPS coordinates are kind of area in which the seafood was harvested was what they're going to be looking through as the GPS coordinate. So yeah, growers are pretty straightforward, and yeah, we can move on to the next slide.
Yeah.
And this is where, Shamanique, you can kind of tell us a little bit more. This is where we want to do a little bit of, okay, what does this really look like, right? So go ahead, Shamanique, thanks.
Right. So from the point of view of a grower, like Eric said, it's pretty straightforward. So a grower in this example would literally just write in their traceability lot code, like starting out, and also those growing coordinates, which has typically been something that's missing when it comes to doing a recall, especially for like leafy greens and things like that, which is why so many times we don't actually know the source of a foodborne illness. We just know that a certain amount of romaine lettuce has been contaminated, but we can't exactly pinpoint the location. This specific record is supposed to help with that in the event of a recall. So pretty straightforward, like Eric said, having that traceability lot code associated with the growing area coordinates for that specific lot code.
Okay, and the next step along the supply chain is really these records for receivers. So the records that a receiver is going to have to keep are really similar to everywhere else along the supply chain that we'll cover later in the slide, but the records that they're going to have to keep is that location identifier and location description for the immediate previous source. So that is just the GPS coordinate of the farm, as well as kind of the area in which it was done. If that's an international farm, it's going to have an import number that will be tracked as part of these records. And the location identifier and location description of where the food received. So that's your facility, whether it's a warehouse or a processing facility. That's just going to have to be recorded, as well as the date and time that you received. And then you get into these other aspects that really tie into that product description. How much are you receiving? How is it packed? What type of packaging is it in? And kind of that traceability product identifier that is associated with those packs. The next one is kind of the point of contact for the traceability lot code generator. I'll touch on this a little bit in one of the next slides because there's a certain classification of a receiver that FDA is calling the first receiver. But in most cases, that traceability lot code generator is going to be the farm. But in other instances where there's kind of multiple people at the farm level who are cooling, harvesting, packing, that first receiver off of the farm may be the one to create that traceability lot code. So that's where that could potentially change. As well as, like I said, just what reference records are you using to maintain this information, and who brought you the food are the key records that are for those general receivers.
So on this form, like Eric was saying, for records for first receivers, you can record all of the information, the traceability lot code, the supplier lot code, quantity received, unit of measure, all of that information in this form. We can also, there's 3 ways that we could potentially get this information. We can do manual entry, we can integrate with an ERP, and that information could be pushed into SafetyChain so that you don't have to do double entry. And it's accurate, and it's a way to house all of that information in one space. Or you could potentially do scanning of certain items or ingredients as they start to come in, or paperwork like that. We won't be a traceability lot code generator, but we can link those traceability lot codes to the different CTEs as it goes through the process. So the very first one would be the records for receivers for most people as they start to receive that information in. And as Eric was saying, when you receive in something, you have to record your own location, the time, and everything like that in an electronic system. Once a record is submitted, it's going to be, that information is automatically tracked for you. It's not something that you would have to do extra to say, this is our location, address, and the time that it was received. Once it's submitted, it's automatically recorded.
Okay, and as I mentioned, these first receivers is this unique classification of receivers, and it's the first person other than the farm that purchases and takes physical possession of a listed food. So really, the records for the most part are the same as any other receiver, but like I said, in some of these, kind of the way the on-farm process works is there may be multiple parties that handle or deal with the food before it actually gets to an off-farm location. So there may be a chance on times in which the farm or one of these other groups don't assign an actual traceability lot code, and that's when the first receiver will be the actual generator and the originator of food under the rule. But they will have to have some of those other information. So generally the farm information, the GPS coordinate, but if someone other than the actual farm is in charge of harvesting, cooling, or packing the food before it gets to that first off-farm location, information for all of that is going to be part of the records as well, including kind of the date and time that each of those activities took place. And the seafood, like I said, it's really similar. They may be creating a traceability lot code, but the information that they'll be having is the harvest date range that the ship was at sea, and the kind of the GPS coordinates or the National Marine Fisheries Group's kind of coordinates for kind of the fishing area where the seafood was caught, instead of the GPS coordinates of the farm.
So this is an example of that first receiver CTE form. We can essentially record the cooling, the location identifier for cooling of the food, for the packing of the food. We can also have a place where you can type in your record reference, type and number, if it's an invoice, if it's a BOL, if it's a packing list. All of those things can be easily referenced on this form. So that links that traceability lot code to all of your reference record types. So when it comes time, if you did have a recall, everything is all together in one place with that important information. Yeah, that's it for this one.
Okay, now we get into a little bit of the more actual processing aspects of the rule, where ingredients could be coming in and leaving as something else. So transformation is when you're dealing with a product or an ingredient that is on the food traceability list and converting it to something else. And this doesn't have to be a major processing where you're drastically changing the nature of the food or anything. It could be as simple as adding a different label or packing into smaller packages. So going from the case of produce down to the clamshell level, you're changing kind of the appearance or the way the food's packed and the way a customer would identify it or anyone would identify it along the supply chain. So really any change of a food that's on the food traceability list into something else is a transformation period, whether something as minimal as repacking or relabeling a food. There are different records that are going to be required, and the way that it's described is food traceability list items that are used in transformation or produced through transformation. So the records are slightly different for those because of what you're doing to the product. So for those ingredients that are on the list that you're using in transformation, those are receiving records that you're going to be keeping. So the traceability lot code, as well as the product's identifier and product description and the quantity you had. However, when you transform those into something else, the records that you're going to have for those foods produced through transformation, so the final product that's going to be leaving your facility is going to be kind of the location identifier of your processing facility or repacking facility, as well as a new traceability product identifier and traceability product description. So if you're going from a case of romaine lettuce down to clamshells of romaine lettuce, or a salad that uses the romaine lettuce, it's going to change that product description to clamshell and a different weight of the actual finished product. So the ingredients used is essentially your receiving records, but then you also have to have some records about the actual item that you produced as well.
My guess, Eric, is that we'll probably get some questions revolving around that, because there's some separation there between used in or produced through. That's gonna have a little bit of an effect. Shamanique, what's this look like?
Like Eric was saying, it looks just like that. We can record the finished product traceability lot code as well as the traceability lot code used of the ingredient. And we'll also be able to track the quantity of that traceability lot code that was used in the unit of measure. And for reference record types, we can get information from a process order for that transformation activity. Like I said, if we can integrate with someone's ERP to have this information already pushed into SafetyChain, so it's not something that you're recording again. But if you do not have an ERP system that you aren't currently using and you're going to have a manual process for how you're doing this would be really helpful to link all of those different CTEs and keep track of that traceability lot code as you go through your process.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, Shamanique, where the labeling of your form name, and this is whether you're creating this as a digital record like you're seeing here in the SafetyChain platform, or if you're doing it still manually. If it is on paper, please give yourself a break. Label them very specifically: foods used in transformation or through. So thanks, Shamanique, appreciate that.
And I think the next slide actually just shows like regular records for transformers. So you can definitely differentiate between the two and make sure that you record all of the proper record reference types. And I will show a little bit later how this all kind of comes together at the end when you do have the distinct naming conventions for your CTEs.
Yeah, and one of the things to mention here too is it's hard to see on the screen, but there's a couple of red asterisks next to some of the form fields on the left, right? And this is something that is pretty interesting. Like if you need these things to abide by the ruling, right, or the guidelines. And so if you need to, your operator you have to force the operator to create that record or create that specific piece of data. Whereas, in stark contrast, if you're using a piece of paper, somebody can skip over a piece or a section of that paper pretty easily, especially if you think about like a new employee or something that's just getting started, or something along those lines, where a digital record will be able to help you guide the operator through the process as well. So.
Yep.
Okay, and jump into the next one. Creators is one that can be a little bit confusing with transformation, but so with transformation, where you're actually using ingredients that are on the food traceability list. A creator, these are the records of when you're creating a food that's on the food traceability list from ingredients that are not on the food traceability list. So the real prime example here is going to be the nut butter category that's on the list. So peanut butter, for example, typically made with not very many ingredients, but none of them on the list. So you may have the actual peanuts, salt, and sugar or something in there. None of those are on the food traceability list, but none of their record requirements are going to be coming into your door, but you're creating a product that is on the list. So this is when you're going to have the kind of records of where you're creating the food, and you'll be creating the traceability product identifier as well as the description and the amounts using amounts that you're producing and kind of how they're packaged. So this is going to fall into the arena of kind of those production records and batch records for the product you're producing for the lot codes, which is really similar to what a lot of people are already applying. I do have a note here that, like I said, retail establishments are getting pulled into the food traceability list, but both for creators and transformation of products at a retail establishment. If they're selling those products directly to a consumer, they will not be required to keep transformation or creation records as part of their system, because it just kind of caveat, it would be much too difficult for too many retail locations to get those records on a daily basis and create those. And so the customer should be able to kind of say, well, this is where I bought it, and then the company would have their receiving records, but is not gonna be required to keep the creation or transformation records at the retail level.
Yeah, and that makes me think, Eric, of the peanut butter grinder, the peanut butter makers in the back of the store, where you can kind of dump in your peanuts and actually grind your own peanut butter. That's something like that. So that's an example of where that retail establishment is just too overwhelming to think of to get through there. So Shamanique, what's the creator's record look like? Walk us through.
This one is fairly straightforward. I also use the example of nut butters for the creation event. And this is where that traceability lot code would be generated if it's a creation event, because like Eric said, it's made from an ingredient that's not on the FTL list. So you would record the traceability lot code number, the lot quantity, unit of measure, and any other record reference types and numbers that could be associated with this creation event. Yeah, it's pretty straightforward from a form perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So as we mentioned, shipping of these products is one of those key items that FDA identified that they need to have their records. So the difference in these is we've kind of put in bold all these records, and that is what, when you ship a food on the food traceability list, you're going to have to include this information with the shipment, so it's getting to the next stop along the supply chain. So if it's imported, those entry numbers, as well as your product identifiers, product descriptions, and how much you're actually shipping. The bottom two records are more for internal purposes that don't have to accompany the shipment. So those reference records that you used either through your transformation, creation, or just receipt of one of these items. And you are going to be required to kind of record who you're hiring to ship or transport the food for you. But that information doesn't have to actually accompany the food. Not that the receiver's not going to notice who is bringing the food to them, so they'll be able to get that information on their own, but it doesn't have to be listed on your records that you're including with your shipment.
And this is an example of the shipping CTE form. This information typically would be recorded on like your BOL, a packing list. It might come from a purchase order that's being held within your ERP system. It just basically houses that information, like I said, either through manual entry or through integration.
And that's key. You know, when you start to talk integration, Shamanique, the systems that you're using to help with the FDA traceability and maybe just the other overall compliance or certification systems and programs that you have, that's a key point. You'd be able to integrate into other things. You'll look for APIs and things of that nature as you want to more fully automate these things. So,
right, because a lot of times this information is just housed in different file cabinets, receiving like has their source of paperwork that gets put in a file cabinet. And then this way, if you have an electronic system that like SafetyChain that integrates, you'll be able to house all of those things and see the traceability all the way through to make it easier to reference back to the things that you may need to get a hold of in the event of a recall.
Yeah, and this is the whole point, right, guys? So Eric, we're going to get to the point of hey, when the FDA comes to you and says, hey, we need to see these things, there's a turnaround time that's been mentioned in the guidelines. And again, this is going to be settled through over the next many months, right? But there is going to be a position, there's going to be a point at which you have to be able to turn these records around to that organization, to that governing body very quickly, right? So with that, I just want to take a second. I'm going to poll everybody here, Eric and Shamanique, to ask you very bluntly. And by the way, just before I open up the poll, just make sure everyone understands nobody's names are attached to these. We're not going to show anybody's names or where you're at on this. But it's just to give us an idea of who's in the room with us, who we're talking with, and what we wanted to know is what your confidence level that your facility could easily produce a sortable spreadsheet within 24 hours of all the KDEs for specific ingredients used in the prior 3 months. So think about this, right? You're asked by the FDA, hey, we need these this data, right, over the last 3 months to help us with this investigation or whatever they're looking for, and we need it tomorrow. So I'm going to launch this poll. It's going to show up on everyone's screen. And when I do that, please take a moment, everyone, if you will. It should be coming up on your screens in just the next couple of seconds here. When you see that, take a second, think through. There's 3 options. Are you confident, already set up to do this, okay, with little effort? You're semi-comfortable, right? So you can produce this information, but it's going to kind of produce a lot of added effort, right? And then there's this questionable, right? We're really not ready for this level of compliance where, hey, I need to turn something around on a dime. So we've got a bunch of people. Thank you so much for going. We've only got 40% voted. So Eric, where would you, if you had to guess, the percentage of the confident people that are like, I'm there, we've got it. Where do you think that'll end up before I show the results?
I'm thinking probably less than 50%, just because, I mean, everyone's used to this 24-hour requirement for FDA kind of getting your data or your information or records. But typically that involves FDA coming to your facility and you can hand them your binder or say, oh, well, let's get the shipping people or receiving people up here and they'll provide all those records or they have them on paper form. But it's this kind of unique thing that FDA is asking, we need this in an electronic sortable form real quick. So it's that format that's a little bit different. I don't doubt that people have the records, but actually having them in that format and organizable is the difficult part. You're right, definitely less than 50%. So, but not bad.
actually. So I think the bulk of everyone definitely, they can get there. It's going to be added effort, might be painful. It's going to be one of those things where you're going to come in to the office, to the plant, and you're going to have this email and you're going to go, oh boy, here we go again. So, and then there's you know, a full quarter of us that really just aren't really ready. We're using some paper records, but we're glad you're still here. Thank you for being honest and open about that as well. You know, that's part of really being able to you know, cope with this in general. So I'm going to pull back up the slides here. Just give me 2 seconds, guys. And then we're going to continue with some of those records. Okay, so let me go back to close the poll. Sorry about this. Hide results. There we go. So next up, we've got you know, the kill step. So there's the whole other sort of ball of wax here. Why don't you take us through that a little bit, Eric?
Yeah, and this touches on that aspect when, like I said, when FDA was creating the list, they really considered where in the supply chain is contamination likely to occur and where in the supply chain could it be controlled. So this kill step is basically something that will stop the requirements for having these records. If you apply a validated kill step to one of these products, the records basically stop there. So you would have your receiving records for the product, but then you apply the kill step, the records end. You're not going to have to keep any shipping records that are required under the rule or anything like that. And as well as that, the person that you send the product to is not going to have to keep receiving records either, because they'll just have information that a validated kill step has been applied. So these microbiological risks have been controlled. And that's where FDA is saying, well, then the need for this traceability information is great because the risk has been controlled. So you will have to have it validated, which I'm sure a lot of companies have been working on their validation studies for kill steps and cooking process since FSMA has put that into as a real significant requirement as part of the preventive controls rule. But it is that validated kill step that basically says, once you apply that validated kill step, subsequent records required under the food traceability list are moot because the risk has been controlled. Okay, and this is where I'm going to touch on basically that poll question that Aaron just had up. So the typical provide records as soon as possible, but not after, but within 24 hours is what you're looking at, which everyone is used to. So that's how FDA may be looking into kind of checking in to see if you have a program that's in compliance. But this electronic sortable spreadsheet requirement comes at any point when the FDA is investigating a recall or a foodborne illness outbreak or anything that causes a potential issue or threat to public health. And what FDA is going to do in these sense, they're basically going to contact the company and say, I need all your traceability records for nut butters between the dates of September and October of 2020, let's say. And within 24 hours, you're going to have to be able to compile all of that information in an electronic sortable spreadsheet for the FDA that identifies the time range that they've asked for, as well as all the food products. So a lot of times this will be specific to a single food product that they suspect is part of a foodborne illness outbreak. So it will be somewhat limited, but really just having that information in that format is going to be the difficult part. So FDA can kind of look through it really quickly, and that will be accompanied to kind of those other information, kind of acronyms and things that they may need to understand the data that you're providing.
And having an easy access to a system that can do that kind of reporting is, you know, obviously makes life much simpler. And Shamanique, I can just imagine like this request coming in and people scramble to the filing cabinets and start pulling stuff out if they haven't already in their processes already transcribed that data into a spreadsheet somewhere. But this is another look at how that can work. Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the good things about using an electronic system is you can leverage programs in order to keep all of that information housed in one place. So I basically built out the food traceability list and use our programs to manage this process by item. And those forms on the left-hand side are the different form names for the different CTEs. And you wouldn't have everyone for every product. It just depends on what your facility receives in, but for the sake of this, I just added them to the entire thing. And then on the right-hand side here, I have basically that representation of over the course of a week, this is how many CTEs were performed, and those are the different records associated with them. And you can see, well, kind of, it's a little small, the different resources, whether it was cheeses, leafy greens, nut butters, fruits and vegetables, that's also available. And so that information can be exported to an Excel spreadsheet, as Eric was saying. And if you go to the next slide, this is that data for you internally, for you to see over the last 30 days how many records you have by resource. So that information that we saw on the previous slide, it shows that I had 4 records for fruits and vegetables, cheeses, tomato, one, and then one for the rest of the ingredients that I submitted a form for. And if you look at the traceability by CTEs, I'm also able to see over the last 30 days how many different CTEs occurred, or how many records were submitted for those individual CTEs. And then if you look down at the bottom, I can also see the FDA traceability lot codes. And so the first one shows that that lot code has 4 CTEs associated with it, and that would be my fruits and vegetables. And that's associated with that. And if you were to click into that column that says 4, it would also tell you the specific CTE events associated with that particular lot code. I just didn't show that completely. So this is what I mean when I say that we can help manage those traceability lot codes for you and show how they're all connected as they go throughout the different CTEs. And it's very easy for you to see, and you can easily set the time frames for the last 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, however you would like to see it. And then you can export that data easily into an Excel spreadsheet for the FDA should they need it. So this is an example of how an electronic system can help this process and kind of streamline it for you.
Okay, and just to touch on kind of the overall timeline for the rule in closing. So as we said, it's a proposed rule, and so the FDA is accepting comments if there's something that you're not understanding or you want clarity on or think is totally wrong. They're open to that, and you can submit comments to the federal docket until January 21st of next year. And then FDA is going to take all those comments that they receive and evaluate them and kind of go through the rule and all the comments with a fine-tooth comb before they release a final rule, which will become effective 60 days after it's published. So that timeline, we'll see how long it takes. Obviously, with these big rules that affect a huge amount of industry, there's going to be a lot of comments. So it's going to take FDA a little bit of time to actually do a thorough review of all those. So, but you should see that sometime and hopefully in the next year or so that they release a final rule. And then after the final rule, all it says effective after 60 days, companies will be allowed 2 years to comply with the rule. And with most of the FSMA rules, you've seen kind of this tiered compliance timeline for different sizes of business. But the whole point of this rule is saying basically everyone needs to be covered at the same time. Otherwise, the rule is a little bit, well, I don't want to say useless, but not very helpful if not everyone's doing it. So there's no tiered compliance timeline for enforcement for you depending on company size. So everyone's going to have that at the same time. There are a lot of exemptions and modified requirements for the rule, but they're somewhat limited at the same time. So the only companies that are like completely exempt from this rule or people are going to be really small. So if you have less than $25,000 in annual sales as a food processor, you're going to be exempt, or you're a farm with less than $25,000 in annual sales, you could be exempt, but that's a pretty small category of the food industry as a whole. And then there's some kind of partial or modified requirements for some of these people that we're not going to go into in a lot of detail here, but it is something that's worth looking at to see how it may affect the overall program.
Yeah, and so we're going to wrap up, guys. We're getting to the end of the hour, and I want to encourage anyone, if any questions, submit them now. I see a lot of good questions about some cheeses, and we're going to get to some other good stuff from Vicki and Deborah and so forth. But right now, I just wanted to take a step back. Okay, we're in the business of helping food and beverage and CPG manufacturers just get their work done better, easier, and live better lives. So, but where to start? I don't think that, generally speaking, the facilities, the C-suite, the folks that are going to be building budgets and so forth for 2021, they're not going to buy traceability. Okay, if you are looking for a solution, here's a couple of points. Though. Avoid the point solutions. You'll, in the long run, you'll have one thing that does one thing really well, but isn't flexible enough to meet future regulatory complexities. And that's what is an absolute for sure. The complexities in regulations will continue to grow. So, and when you start to discuss these things, you're going to inevitably have an ROI discussion. Okay. What's the return of an investment to us, right? I would avoid trying to talk about just traceability specifically, but talk more broadly about audits and overall risks, right? The full regulation gamut and the certification side of the house, and then even auditing suppliers. I mean, that's critical in this whole thing anyway. So, and then the last thing I'd say is just get some help, understand your options. We do have an executive guide to plant management software that's out. It does go through very specifically the ROI of something like this, and it breaks it down piece by piece. And you will actually see 3 areas in that ROI guide about audits and overall risk, regulations and certifications, and auditing suppliers. If you do need someplace to go and to get this this discussion started for your facility, we encourage you to take that and read that. So with that, we are going to jump into some questions, guys. So I'm going to lob them over, and I'm just going to pick on you, Shamanique, or you, Eric, a little bit here and there. The first one, and I had the same question, and Eric, I've been meaning to ask you this offline, but how is the hard cheeses defined? Is there Vicki asked, is there a maximum moisture specified for hard cheeses, or how does that look?
So it's actually soft cheeses is what's covered. So the cheeses other than hard cheeses is what's on the food traceability list. And the way that FDA defines that is it doesn't call out moisture content or anything. That says all soft ripened or semi-soft cheeses and fresh soft cheeses that are made with pasteurized or unpasteurized milk. So soft ripened, semi-soft cheeses is the general category, but it doesn't go into specific kind of water content requirements and things like that.
Got it. Thank you. That's good to know, because in my mind I'm like, yeah, exactly. Some of the cheeses I've had, over Thanksgiving break were pretty hard, but I didn't know if that would be covered. All right. So, excuse me, Laura asked, can we ask, based on this rule, can we ask vendors to produce, send us lot information with delivery notes or the PO, because some products like produce do not have lot codes?
You definitely can ask. So yeah, that's kind of the whole idea is the fresh produce, and that's where they kind of say the farm may not actually assign a lot code, or the grouping of farms, harvesters, coolers, packers, but the first person off farm that receives that product it is required that they do create a traceability lot code. So that shouldn't be an issue anymore. They should be creating, it's required that they do create a traceability lot code for fresh produce or lettuce when it's first received in a non-farm location.
Okay, great. Another cheese question. I have this feeling it could be some folks in Wisconsin, not sure, but so if I purchase cheese products that have already been packaged and purchased from the manufacturer or distributor, will these products come in with the traceability product identifier, and product description? So after the dust settles, will that happen?
Yeah, it really should. So if the manufacturer is creating and packaging it like finished consumer product, they would have created that traceability lot code and product identifier. And that is part of the shipping record that they will be required to send along with any shipment that they're sending to you.
Very good. Very good. Got an interesting input. This isn't a question, Shamanique, but you'll like this. So Rob on the phone on the webinar said he didn't respond to the poll that we produced as it doesn't apply to me as an FDA investigator. In my experience, however, I would agree that less than 50% of firms are confident in producing documentation. Just an observation. I appreciate that, Robert. Thank you for that that input. That does help us. And again, you know, about that 24-hour turnaround time frame for records, Marcus asked, there was a mention of an email altering the plant of the need. Is there a definition of how this this would come? You know, is it an email, is it a phone call, official letters from the FDA? I'd love to ask Robert, but Shamanique, how do you usually see these come into the plant? Like when you get notified from the FDA, what's that look like? Is it a letter? Is it an email? Is it a call?
Or, sorry, say that again.
If the FDA is going to come, yeah, if the FDA is going to come knocking, right? How do they knock?
Just show up. They show up. They show up.
Rob's still out there laughing. He's like, I don't call first. No. So yeah, I think ultimately, Mark. Yeah, they just kind of say, "Hi, we're here." No, Marcus, that's a good question. Generally speaking, you know, I don't think that there is a prescribed way that the FDA does reach out to you. I was just giving that as an example of, hey, when you do get to that point and FDA is coming around, you got to be ready. So, Deborah, I've got a question. So, salad leafy green products do not get a validated kill step. So we will have to trace all the way to distribution, ? So I think that's a yes or no. With the salad leafy green product, there's no kill step. So where are you tracing through?
Exactly. So it's each step along the supply chain is going to have those records, and one of my favorite terms is always nobody cooks their lettuce. So yeah, it's never going to have a kill step. So those leafy greens are going to be the ones that you're not going to have kind of the exit through a kill step at any point that I'm aware of. That it will have the records along all the way through distribution to the retail location.
Got it. All right, and we are and kind of end of the time here. We've got a few more people. I appreciate all of the questions. We weren't able to get to everyone. Rob, again from the FDA, did say, yes, true, we just show up. So Rob, thanks. I'm gonna reach out to Rob. We might have him on Beyond Compliance. Love to get some insight. You know, it's often a really good point of view to get from the FDA. I know there's a lot of hoops that Rob would have to jump through to be able to do something like that, but I might reach out to you, Rob, anyway. So, hey, listen, there's a lot more we could discuss, but we've got a lot more resources for you online. SafetyChain.com. Go to theatchissongroup.com as well. They've got a lot of great stuff. And join us again every month. We also do FSMA Friday. Go sign up. Go engage with us online on LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter. We'll keep you in the know, and we appreciate everyone's time today. Shamanique and Eric, once again, fantastic work. Thank you for joining Beyond Compliance for December. Have a great one.
Thank you, guys.
You too, Aaron. Thank you.